Hi everybody, this is Dr. Peters, and I hope this works. I just talked to myself for probably 15 minutes and didn't realize this wasn't recording. So here we go. It looks like it's recording. All right, second round. We're doing chapter 1. Think of this as the background to pharmacology. Well, some people love it, but a lot of people don't like going through these whole chemical things and learning about all the practice acts and things like that. But unfortunately, we have to go through that to get to the good stuff. Okay, so I always use the textbook, and this is the textbook you should have right here. So the textbook is real important. As the exam questions are based off that because they're NCLEX based questions because we want you guys to pass the NCLEX. So my goal is to, number one, you to not only, I don't want you just trying to memorize everything. I want you to I want you to understand it because that's going to help you to be able to critically think through all of your questions. On the NCLEX. Of course, I want you to pass because you can't work as a registered nurse, but we want you to be good, excellent, and safe nurses when you get out there. So, all right, so let's get started. Oops, let me get back in here. Okay. Now, there's core ethical principles. What does that mean? Now, it means this is like nursing 101. But it's also retaught again in your master's program and my doctorate program because these are the core ethical principles. About patient care in general, your textbook talks more about research. And to go back a bit, you should follow me when in the textbook because I really go page by page. So it's kind of like killing two birds with one stone, right? You can read and you can go through this with me. I'm going to try to describe things in layman terms for you. All right, so what I want you to do is write down after each one, respect for persons, beneficence, and justice. All right, so respect for persons. Write down the patient's right to self-determination. The patient's right to self-determination. What does this mean? We need to have respect for people that have the ability to do things on their own. Are they autonomous? So this all has to do with patient rights, and we need to respect and try to, if a patient has the ability to do things themselves, then that's good. We want to have respect for that. So it's the patient's right to self-determination. So how are you going to do that? You're going to make sure that you're going to assess their cognitive status and make sure this all has to do with them making healthcare decisions or making decisions for themselves. Many times you'll run into the family thinking maybe that they're not of sound mind when they really are of sound mind. You are the patient's advocate. All right, so go down to beneficence. And beneficence, it's protecting research patients from harm. So it's protecting them from harm. When they're in a research study, you as a nurse, because you may be involved in patients in research studies, even if they come in the office or they're inpatient and they happen to be in a research study, you still need to understand these core ethical principles. We want we want them to not be harmed, so no undue side effects. Make sure that they're healthy and they have the guidelines in order to be in the study. Also, are they able to make decisions for themselves? So that goes back to respect for persons, beneficence, and then justice is fairness, so right, fair. So justice is really important because years ago, prisoners were put in clinical trials and they weren't even told that they were. Many of them were given things that they died from and they weren't told that they were taking it. It was just not fair. So there was they didn't have any of these principles as well as other regulations that are now in place for research trials. So those are the three things that I want you to remember. If you go to page 3 on the bottom, it has this exact same thing. It'll tell you exactly it goes through, and then if you look at page 4, you have human clinical experimentation, and this is basically what that is. There's 4 drug phases, but as you see, you have to discover the drug first, which the pharmaceutical companies do, chemists. Then it goes through the phases. And if you see phase 1, it's a small amount of people, and then if that works, then you can go into phase 2, then phase 3. Then you submit it for the FDA application, and then you test for long-term effects, optimal and additional uses. So that's after it goes out for sale. So if a drug's approved, there's a lot of doctors that won't prescribe it initially because they want to see what happens once it's out on the market. Let's use Chantix for example. Chantix is used for, Chantix is the brand name, varenicline is the generic name. It's right now it's owned by the drug company Pfizer that makes it. It went out on the market, did really well during these 4 phases here, went out on the market, and people were having suicidal thoughts, anger outbursts, and so what they were finding is people with more severe mental illness weren't tolerating it. So then they had to go back and do trials again. In the meantime, though, they put out a black box warning. A black box warning is something that you have to read that, and it's usually something that could detrimentally happen, like this can cause suicidal thoughts, blah, blah, blah. So we really cut back on prescribing this for smoking cessation for patients with mental illness. Okay, and then they ran another trial to see if that's really the truth, and they determined that it's really not completely the truth, although there's a small amount of subjects that have that. We just have to be careful when we're prescribing patients with severe mental illness. You can still prescribe for anxiety, depression. So that's just my example of what happens with the drug process. If you look on page 5, it gives an example of an informed consent. All patients need to sign an informed consent. You don't need to know any of this on page 5. You just need to know that patients need to sign an informed consent. And you need to understand that they go through phases and how the system is and how drugs are approved, okay? You definitely need to know your 3 core ethical principles. And then, which I talked about most of this, but at the bottom there's an independent variable and dependent variable. So think of variables as things, symptoms, people. Now, independent variable is something aside from yourself, so it's the drug. The dependent variable is how you tolerate it. What kind of symptoms do you have? So that's on the bottom of page 4. So all these dependent variables are more like your sex, your age, weight, what diseases do you have, what are you eating, and that's why when you go through these clinical research trials, you're usually staying inpatient. It's very controlled because they want the least amount of variables as possible, because otherwise the results may not be accurate. So I hope that makes sense. Other things that they do for clinical research is randomized control trials. That is the best research. We also level research, but it's the best research. That means that 1/2 of the group will get a pill that's just like a sugar pill, and the other group will get the other independent variable, the drug. So that's the independent variable. They don't know they're getting the sugar pill though. That's a randomized control trial. It's randomized. They have no idea. Okay, so Code of Ethics. So the American Nurse Association came out with the Code of Ethics in 1950 and then revised again in 2015 to account for like social media and our expanded role in clinical research. If you look on page 7, box 1-3 are all the provisions of the Code of Ethics. And what that basically is that we are showing compassion to patients. We are committed to all stages of from the patient to the community to the population, safety of the patient. So I want you to go through these and just try to, you don't need to memorize them, but I want you to know that there is a code of ethics and for us to carry out nursing in a responsible manner and good quality of nursing care. Again, the main thing comes down, we are the patient's advocate. Many times they don't have advocates and we need to be the ones, right? This all started with Florence Nightingale, as it says, who believed that a nurse's ethical duty was first and foremost to care for the patient, which is true. And every single year for years, except for 9/11, 2001, nurses are voted the most caring profession and the most trusted profession. And 9/11 in 2001 or 2002, it was firefighters. So they had probably come in second, right? All right, so what's the nurse's role in clinical research? You may not, at this point in the game, you're like, why would I be involved with a patient in clinical research? Well, you may not be, but there's many times where you will. If you have a patient that's inpatient with heart failure, let's just use that for an example, they may be in a clinical trial for a drug, perhaps a blood thinner that's they're trying to see if that will work to go out on the market. And so you still need to be aware that they're doing that and responsible for their safety, and you should know the research protocol. So if anybody comes in with that on a trial, they should have the research protocol so you understand exactly how it's working. And actually, I used to see patients a lot with adverse reactions because they were in the clinical trial. They come as inpatient. We'd have to monitor, like their liver enzymes went up too high, and they had to be monitored inpatient. Okay. All right, so there are some drug standards, and the drug standards, think of the drug standards as the Bible. It's not the Bible, but it's like the Bible for drugs. The USPNF and the International Pharmacopoeia. So these are basically the authoritative sources that shows the drugs, the chemical makeup, the substances, how it's compounded, how it's made. It also shows that it's met high standards for use, packaging. I mean, it's the whole works of the drug standards. Just understand that. Now, if you let's say go to Walgreens and look at vitamins and stuff. If it has USP on it, that means that it's met the standards, which is good. So it's good to know that, because there's a lot of supplements out there that don't have that. It was first established in 1951. You don't need to know the year, but just know that it started a long time ago. And then federal legislation through the years have passed certain acts, and which acts as a law. So that's another term for a law. And it all started with the Shirley Amendment. And how I think of this is, you surely can't be serious. This happened. If you've watched, you probably are too young, but I love Airplane. It's a movie, and it's got the dumbest sense of humor. I love dumb humor. And he says, you surely can't be serious to Shirley. So that's how I remember it. Yeah, I know it's dumb. But anyways, the Shirley Amendment. So what that is they're giving morphine. This is Winslow's soothing syrup to infants, and it contained morphine, and many infants died from that. So under the Shirley Amendment, the government had to prove intent to defraud before a drug could be removed. So it just brings out the first law. Like, you had to make sure that this drug was not that it was unsafe, and then it could be removed from the market. So anything removed from the market at this point follows different specific acts that's gone through the years. You don't have to know all of these by heart. I would like you, though, to be familiar with the Patient Protection and Affordable Care Act, because that's still what's going on now. Every drug has to go through the Food and Drug Administration. If you look on page 8 and 9, all of these have to do with drugs in general. And if you look at the table on page 9, these are things that you should know. This is Schedule 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5. These are narcotics, or controlled substances, I should say. The only thing I want you to do is under Schedule 3, cross out in the parentheses acetaminophen with hydrocodone. That is up in Schedule 2 now. So all hydrocodone products, that's morphine. Any morphine product is up in Schedule 2 now. So when I prescribe a medication, I need to know what schedule these drugs are. That determines the potency of the drug and the safety of the drug. Schedule 1 is your marijuana, heroin, ecstasy. Okay, so I'm not prescribing that. Now, marijuana, there's some medical uses for marijuana, and that can be prescribed in a certain manner, although I've never prescribed it. So anyways, just think the one is the most potent. Right now it's not legal, blah, blah, blah. Schedule 2 is all of your morphine derivatives. So anybody on Dilaudid, OxyContin, Percocet, Demerol, Duragesic, those are all brand names for morphine or a morphine derivative. Remember, Schedule 1 heroin, think of it as it all comes from the poppy seed. So think of the poppy plant. It all comes from there. The most potent form is heroin. Then it goes down from there. You have your morphine. So it's like a family tree from the poppy plant. Schedule 3 narcotics is your Tylenol with codeine. Codeine's still a morphine derivative, although not as strong. Going down the tree. When you get to Schedule 4 is more of your what's called a benzodiazepine. That is for anxiety, pretty much anxiety, people that are undergoing procedures and need to be calmed down. Say you're claustrophobic and need an MRI, that's your Xanax, your Valium, your Ativan, anything with a LAM, azepam, a PAM, midazolam. So all of these are Schedule 4. And then Schedule 5 is your Tylenol, guaifenesin with codeine, and that is the cough syrups because the codeine level in it is lower. So it's a lower potential for abuse. So if you see on the right the description of what it is, how it really has to pertain with what abuse level it's at. It's very interesting. As a law in the state of Wisconsin, any scheduled drug, I need to go to the prescription drug monitoring program online and look up any patient that I prescribe it to and make sure that they're not getting it from other places. This is all part of the opioid drug abuse issue. Okay, pay attention to the Nurse Practice Act. It starts at the bottom of page 9. What I want you to know that what the Nurse Practice Act does is governs all drug administration by nurses. So this is like your 5 rights, right dose, right patient, right time, etc., as well as just making sure you're safe. So this tells you that you have to have a doctor's order in order to give a medication out. You do not have to worry about the Canadian drug regulation, but just understand that the Nurse Practice Act governs all drug administration by RNs. Okay? We're trying to combat drug counterfeiting. There's a lot of that goes on. You can buy it online. With online stuff, it's just exploded basically. So there's initiatives out there to do that. So our role is consumer education. So we have to tell the patients that if there's any differences in appearance of their medicines, the packaging's different, the labeling's different, or if they have weird side effects, they need to report that. There's a reputable online pharmacy that carries a designation of verified internet pharmacy practice site. So you can go to the website that's on page 10 under the initiatives to combat drug counterfeiting, and it gives you a list of safe online pharmacies, which is good. It also gives the FDA. So if anybody has an adverse reaction, we should contact the FDA, and it's a thing that you can report online. This is like an adverse reaction, or if you suspect there's counterfeiting of drugs. All right, so drug names. This is going to be like the whole thing for pharmacology. So you have to know that all drugs have a chemical, generic, and brand name. So let's go back to the picture. If you look in your textbook on page 3, in drug discovery, they come up with the chemical name of it. So that's when they do like the chemical, like you see the diagram of the sodium and the just nitrous oxide, potassium, and whatever's making the drug. All right, so that's your chemical name, and it's like usually some name that we can't even say. Then when it goes to phase 1, 2, 3, and phase 1, 2, and 3, they're generic names. It's a generic name. Like, for example, I remember seeing a patient that was in a clinical trial for um, Plavix, which is a blood thinner, but at the time it was called Abipixaban. Yeah, Abipixaban. That was the generic name, and so that's what the clinical trial was under. And then once it gets approved for FDA, they name a brand name. So Plavix, the drug companies own the brand name. All right. So just know that all medications have this. Generic drugs must be approved by the FDA before they can be marketed. So I'm going to use an example of Lipitor. You used to see it on TV. It's for cholesterol. Pfizer has Lipitor, and they own the drug. They own that chemical makeup of the drug, but they have a contract with the FDA that says, okay, in 2012, our contract's up. And that means that generic manufacturers can go ahead and pick up the drug and make the drug and sell it, hopefully for cheaper. Sometimes that doesn't always happen. But then now it's called a generic name. So atorvastatin. It's been atorvastatin all along, but the company owns the drug as Lipitor. So that means when you go to your doctor, now they usually will prescribe the atorvastatin, the generic, and you'll go to your pharmacy and they'll get it from a certain manufacturer. You hope that that pharmacy gets it from a reputable manufacturer, which most of them do. I mean, you can ask, but basically when it comes down to it, it's about money. Why do I prescribe generic Lipitor? Well, number one, it's the insurance company. The patient's insurance company says, no, you can't prescribe the brand name. Otherwise, it's going to cost them $400 a month. So I have to do the atorvastatin, which is the generic. So they go to pharmacy, and now think of this, the generic drug, they give ratings of that. So if it's an A rating, that means that it's bioequivalent. So it's basically the same thing as the brand name. It's that close. If there's less than a 20% variance in drug absorption, then it's considered equivalent to the brand name. So if it's within 20%, then they can have that A rating, okay? We have to keep in consideration, I've had patients come into me and say the drug just doesn't work as well, and I believe them because these drugs, they're less expensive because they don't have to go through extensive testing. They were tested for safety and efficacy by the drug company. So Pfizer did that a long time ago. But now these manufacturers have to put this drug together, and they may have different fillers to make it or binders to get the pill in form, different things to shape the tablets. So these can control how fast or slow the drugs release into the body and how it's metabolized. So there is some variance at times with generic names. Many people don't notice it, but some people do. There are a couple medications, though, that should not be switched from brand name to generic. One is Coumadin and warfarin. So Coumadin is the brand name for the blood thinner, and warfarin is the generic name. If you start on the brand name Coumadin, which you'll see people that have been on it for years on the brand name, and a rare instance, they just don't tolerate or they can't get their blood regulated on the generic and they'll put them on the brand. You don't see it too much anymore. But if they're on the Coumadin, you keep them on the Coumadin. If you start them on warfarin, you keep them on the warfarin, meaning you don't switch because that's going to mess up their blood thinning issue. Or not issue, you're trying to keep the blood thin. The other one is Dilantin is a brand name, and phenytoin, I call it that. That's for seizures. You'll see phenytoin out as the generic. If they're on that, you keep them on that. You don't switch them. If they're on the brand name Dilantin, it's for a reason. And then the third drug is Synthroid, is for thyroid, and levothyroxine is a generic name. There's some people that have to be on Synthroid because their body's just not metabolizing the generic well, so you keep them on Synthroid. When I write a prescription, I have to write brand name medically necessary for all these in order for it to be covered. Now we have over the counter drugs, which have been for quite a long time. But in 2002, we have now more standard labeling. So if you go to the pharmacy, look at some of the drugs. I encourage you to do that. And so it tells you on page 11, what the active ingredients are and how much, the purpose of it, what's the uses, any warnings, instructions on how and when to take it, and any inactive ingredients. So I want you to know that these drugs are safe, okay? They are effective, but they don't come without side effects. And we still have to do a lot of education because these can interact with some of the prescription drugs they're taking, or different over-the-counter drugs can interact with one another too. So we need to make sure that we're doing a lot of education. And so when you're gathering a med list, it's not just their prescription labels. Make sure you get all over the counter and natural medicines. Now people are into essential oils, so you have to make sure you're getting all of those because all those can have some interaction, possibly. So all over the counter drugs should be listed as taken. All right, remember they are safe, they are effective, and they work, but they come with side effects and adverse reactions. So that's why you need to make sure that you get a good history. So these are some drug resources. If you look on page 12, you can just look over the 2002 regulations for over-the-counter drugs. It just gives you a label. We should do a field trip to the pharmacy. That would be kind of fun, wouldn't it? Put you on a scavenger hunt. Okay, so drug resources here. There's different ones. Now, like the prescriber's letter, only prescribers can get a hold of it. I love that. If we get further into it and I find something good from there, I'll show you. Also, Medline Plus is good. The Handbook of Non-Prescription Drugs is really good for your, natural drugs, natural medications, and things like that. There are some credible internet sites I recommend putting on your phone. Number one, I recommend you have a drug book because it's always good to have something in hand to look something up. But there's a couple things. There's Lexicomp, Lexi-comp. No, I think it's all one word. Epocrates, Epocrates, and MPR. All those are free. You don't have to do the paid version to get you the drugs. And I think Epocrates has interactions too, which is nice. I use MPR just because I'm prescribing, so yeah, I just think it's good for me. So that's the resources. Now let's go through a couple questions. The nurse identifies the act that provides for the privacy of patient health information as the Drug Regulation Reform Act, Drug Relations Act, the FDA Modernization Act, or HIPAA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So I'm going to go back and let's find the Drug Regulation Reform Act here. And Drug Regulation Reform Act, I don't see it on here at all. So Drug Abuse Control Amendments. Okay, let's look at the Drug Relations Act. Is that on there? Nope. All right, so it must not be that. The FDA Modernization Act. Is that it? Yeah, okay, so that's 1997. That means review and use the new drug, 5 provisions. Review and use of the new drugs is accelerated. Drugs can be tested in children, and clinical trial data is necessary for experimental drug use for serious and life-threatening conditions. So I think it's HIPAA, which I should have put the answer there, but it is. It's D, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act. So know that it's HIPAA. I think that you've learned about HIPAA by now. The nurse identifies the primary purpose of federal legislation in drug standards as preventing overcharging for drugs. Okay, so we want to find out when you're doing this question, the nurse identifies, primary purpose, federal legislation and drug standards. Those are your three things. So the nurse is looking for the primary purpose of federal legislation and drug standards. So those are all your drug standards in page 8 and 9. So what's the purpose overall, our overarching purpose? Are we preventing overcharging for drugs? Are we controlling efforts in drug research? Are we ensuring public safety? Or are we moderating effective drug usage? So we may look at these and think, oh, well, yeah, maybe we are controlling efforts in drug research, but what's the best answer here? Or it's been really, as a nurse, we want to make sure that safety, so to me, safety stands out. So controlling efforts in drug research, that's more so the informed consent and your phases 1, 2, 3, and 4, and study design. So I'm not going to choose that for federal legislation. Controlling efforts in drug research, so I'm going to take that out. Preventing overcharging for drugs, no, that really has nothing to do with those. And monitoring effective drug uses, it's a little bit like that, so I could choose that possibly, but I'm going to go with ensuring public safety because it's the best answer, okay? In which situation regarding controlled substances requires the supervising RN to intervene? All right, so let's break it down. Situation, controlled substances, requires supervising RN to intervene. So the staff keeps a separate controlled substances record for all required information. That's A. B, controlled substances are locked away from patients and all staff members have keys for necessary access. C, opioids are kept under double lock to limit access to them. Or D, all discarded or wasted controlled substances are countersigned. All right, so let's break this down. So I'm going to right away take out B because all staff members should not have keys to access controlled substances. It should be one set of keys and that is it. So I'm taking out B. The staff keeps a separate controlled substance record for all required information. What situation requires a supervising RN to intervene? Okay. All discarded and wasted controlled substances are countersigned. That's true. Opioids are kept under double lock. Not necessarily double lock, but they are locked. So I'm going to go with D because you do need a cosigner to cosign it. All right, so that's the answer. A nurse is administering a dose of furosemide. That's Lasix. That's a diuretic, meaning water pill. The nurse is aware that Lasix is the blank for the drug. So is it the generic, chemical, non-proprietary, or brand name? So we didn't really learn about non-proprietary. Let's take that out right away. And the chemical name, it would be something really goofy. So I'm going to take that out right away. So it's between the generic and the brand name. So Lasix is in parentheses. So Lasix, anything in the parentheses is the brand name. So I'm going to pick D, brand name. Lasix is brand name. All right, and that is it.